Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever. Today is Wednesday, June 25th, and we're continuing on with a series of conversations we've been having with local state representatives and today state senators about the recently concluded legislative session up in Montpelier, which finally, I guess, came to an end sometime in the middle of June instead of the end of May, but we'll learn a lot more about that in a moment. We've been fortunate to have with us several of our area's state representatives, and today it's our pleasure to be joined in the studio today by the two state senators from Bennington County, and also the town of Wilmington.
And Londonderry.
And Londonderry, okay. Here with us today are Seth Bongartz and Rob Plunkett. They are the two state senators from our corner of the state. Really pleased to have you both with us. Thank you very much for making the time for this conversation. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Andrew.
I guess obviously the big issue that you and your colleagues up in the legislature grappled with this past session was around the education bill, H 554, 454, I believe it wound up being. So I guess I just wanted to get us started, and Seth, maybe I'll turn to you first here, since you were the chair of the Senate Education Committee. Can you summarize for us what this bill does or will do? I mean, I know it's not everything is going to kick in immediately. It's going to be a couple of years really before
Yep.
all the provisions kind of take effect. But as it stands now, what are we looking at in terms of some of the major changes that this bill will do?
Well, maybe first step back for a second and talk about the existing system,
Okay.
which came into being through Act 60 and Act 68 following the Brigham decision. And there's a handful of issues with the existing system. One of them is, frankly, that it is so Byzantine that nobody understands it. And related to that is the fact that because what fundamentally happens at core is that districts all over Vermont vote their school budgets in March. One big number gets produced out of all of those budgets that passed. And then the legislature fundamentally just sets the multiplier to raise the money. And one of the problems with that is that when you go to vote in your town, you actually don't know what effect, when you pass the budget, it's gonna have on your tax rate, because it's so dependent on what voters do elsewhere in Vermont. And so it's produced this bizarre effect over time, and it was all exacerbated by COVID and the stress. The system really got stressed under COVID, but what happens is that districts that are high spenders have part of that paid for by districts that are lower spenders. And then when you have districts in Vermont that are really if you will, some of the poorer districts in Vermont, people say, I can't pay, their taxes are too high. So they vote down their very conservative budgets, thinking that it's going to do something to ameliorate their tax rates, when they actually could have voted a 10% increase. It wouldn't have made any difference, virtually. So we have this bizarre outcome now where Brigham was designed to equalize spending or equalize opportunity, and what we have now is a 2-to-1 disparity in spending, because the system just doesn't work. So we're going to a system that is called the foundation formula, and at core what happens with it is that you get, everybody in Vermont gets charged $1, I think it's $1.36 under the bill, $1.36 per 100 goes into a big pot, and it comes back on a per weighted pupil basis, and the dollars follow the student. And the weighted part of that is important without getting, okay, I'm getting to the weeds, but the weighted part is important because a student is not just a student. Because if they come from a district with a lot of poverty, there's additional weight for poverty, so that student can count it as 2 students. Or if it's English as a second language, and depending on the scale, one student can theoretically end up counting as much as 3 students because of all those disadvantages and difficulty of teaching some kids. So it's still a little bit weedy or complicated, but fundamentally, everybody pays the same, everybody gets the same back down. And so it's a system that actually will have the effect of equalizing per pupil spending across Vermont, whether it's wealthy districts or poorer districts. And so it'll sort of go a long way toward achieving the goals of Brigham that have been lost in the current system.
But there will be some districts that will see their property taxes go up and others that will see them come down, which I imagine for some of those districts that were attempting, I guess, in their minds to be thrifty and frugal, now they're gonna be penalized for that.
Well, it's really hard to tell yet because we don't yet know where how the districts are gonna be put together and what they're gonna look like. And it's also a very slow roll-in. It doesn't start at all until FY '29, and then there's a 5-year roll-in beyond that. So it's, 8 or 9 years now before the whole thing really comes fully into effect. That would have allowed towns that were officially organized and low spenders to spend a little bit less and get a little bit less, but that just wasn't gonna fly with the majority of the legislature. So, but I think, it's such a slow rollout, there'll be a lot of time to adjust.
Now, the governor, at least as I understood it, Governor Phil Scott was interested in getting this bill into a much faster timeline, it sounded like, not only would it get past this session, but things would start happening very quickly, like next year, I guess. But what it sounds like is that the rollout is gonna be extended over 3 or maybe even more years. Is he okay with that, or?
From his target rollout, it got delayed a year. He was looking for FY '28, and it became FY '29, which means, but FY '29 means July 1 of '28.
Right.
So he was looking for July 1 of '27, it's now July 1 of '28 for the rollout to start. A lot still has to happen before it.
Because it seems like it's a complicated piece of legislation and a lot going on here that the potential for things or unintended consequences happening if things were kind of accelerated too quickly could be vast. But I guess, Rob, the governance is also a part of this, right? I mean, that's another big change in addition to trying to bring down the overall cost of education in the state, which I guess was the driver from the results of the November 2024 elections.
Yeah, you had asked at the beginning what was going to be going into effect more or less immediately, what's going to be going into effect later on. When you talk about the governance, it could mean a couple of different things. Well, there are some things that are going into effect almost immediately. I think they might be in effect July 1st, and that's class sizes. So there's minimum class sizes for different grade groups, but that's also something that's more or less staggered, where it's class sizes over a 3-year period, and then there's a 2-year period for the different schools to try to correct it and to work with the Agency of Education, and then even then the Agency of Education may or may not do something to remedy that. So there's plenty of time for schools to really look into that and figure out how the class size minimums work into how they function. There's also the number of grades within a classroom, that too is part of the class sizes. It's also staggered out. So that's part of the governance structure. I'll let Seth talk a little bit about, there's some aspects on limitations to independent schools that go into effect right away. But that's really the limit on things that are happening right away. And Seth will correct me if I'm wrong, because he's detailed into this. But the governance part of it is really going to be what we look at next year, or really what's going to be done over the course of the summer through December. And I think it's December when, I forget the name of the committee, but the committee is
The Mapping Task Force.
The Mapping Task Force will come together for proposed new districts, larger districts than we have now, which I think everybody is in agreement with, that we need larger districts. We can't have the 119 that we have now, which is less than what we had 10 years ago. But we see that as something that is important, and that's part of the reason why we needed to get this put forward, so we'll have that conversation on the districts. And the districts are really going to be what's important, whether, I could go into the weeds of what the government structures could look like, but they could look in various different ways. And that's also going to flow right into what the potential property tax increase or decrease is. So towards the end of the session, we heard a lot about these districts will have less of a property tax, higher of a property tax. None of that really made any sense because they're based on the current districts right now. So there is a big question mark in terms of that. But what we do know about property taxes, not part of this bill, but was part of, I think it was part of the big bill, the appropriations bill, is that we are going to be spending, buying down tax rates. So what we're going to be seeing for either next year or the year after, not more than a 1% increase, which is significant. That's not sustainable. That's what we've been doing. That's why part of the education reform was needed. But in terms of governance, we'll be seeing different governance structures, but we don't know exactly what they're going to be looking like right now.
One of the other issues I'm sure you both heard a lot about during the session was how the effect of closing some of the smaller local schools. I mean, right here in the PR issue, there's been talk of at least 2 of the local elementary schools closing, and I'm sure across the state there are many other towns and districts that they have fewer students than they used to have, and would they need to close? Do you think that this bill is going to drive things in that direction, or is it still too early to tell?
It's too early to tell. In our committee, we took out any reference to class sizes or school size on the theory that it would happen more organically as the dollars became a little bit more constricted, because, by the way, within this system, there's the amount that I talked about that will be the base amount for everybody, and that it's only going to go up by effectively the CPI. It's a different indices that uses more labor than CPI, but effectively, but I think that, Rob talked about the class sizes. I think what we'll find is that only, if a school is running efficiently and it's got a real role to play in the community, that the secretary is not going to look to, go out and close every small school that doesn't quite meet the number of students or whatever. I think the fact that one of the key words in the bill as it relates to the secretary referring to the State Board for Action is may. And I think that's, if it was shall, that would be cause for alarm. May is going to mean, I think, that it happens when a school really needs to close. And when it's not viable. So I think, but if it were up to, I think, both of us, and I know for me, and I'm pretty sure for Rob, we would just had no reference to class size at all. This is so much better than House's language, which was shall and close, very prescriptive. And so if there's things to like about this bill. One of the things that I don't like as much is that it's a little more top down than I wanted, and than it was when it came out of my committee, and especially on the class size thing. But it's so much better than the House version that I kind of got to be okay with. I kind of got to the point where it's okay, it'll be okay. Yeah.
And in terms of closing schools, that's what everyone is concerned about. And we did talk about the class sizes not being something that is going to automatically lead to that. But if I recall correctly, there is a part where there is definitely a local voice whenever the agency would be considering the closure. So there is a little bit, there's a voice for the local community, but as Seth said, what we have been seeing, as you had mentioned, there's sort of this organic change of the communities figuring out what's needed for them and going forward, and that's what we're really hoping this bill will continue to allow. And it's only in the extreme circumstances where anyone would have to come in, and even then the communities will be talking about it in depth with what needs to be done for whichever particular school might be at issue.
Now, there are many other things besides education that you guys worked on, but before we leave this subject, Rob mentioned the independent school issue. Seth, I mean, how did we wind up there? I mean, are independent schools, in your view, protected, or are they still at some risk of losing some of the public financing?
They're always at risk. It's very hard to get people who have no experience with the way our schools work to understand how they work. And so, but what happened is at the beginning of the session, the independent school community came together and made an offer, basically, sort of, and said, we're willing to shrink the number of schools that can receive tuition dollars by actually a fair amount, a little more than half, but, and bring it into areas where it's integral to the delivery system. And that really is this corner of Vermont, the Northeast Kingdom, and the area around Thetford Academy and Sharon Academy. And that's where it's really integral to the system. And so the idea was, in areas where there's just like a one-off, and it doesn't really, it's not critical, there's not a lot of students going there from, with tuition dollars, to just sort of eliminate those and make it so our independent schools around here are all surviving at this point. And that was that was not without some controversy. But that was very important to us, that the system here, and obviously some people, and a lot of testimony. It really, what really began to emerge is the degree to which this is about rural Vermont. And not just independent schools, because this organization got formed called the Rural School Community Alliance. 90 towns joined, some stopped paying dues to the NEA and the Superintendent's Association, and moved everything over to this organization, which is really focused on schools in rural Vermont. And it's not just independent schools, it's a lot of times it's smaller public schools. And so the way that rural Vermont plays into this really emerged as a real consideration, in part because these people got together, formed this alliance, and all of a sudden just had a lot of people join, a lot of districts joining and saying, this is what we need, somebody to really help rural Vermont navigate this process.
Well, we could probably spend our entire program today
Yeah.
talking about the ins and outs of the education bill, but let's move on to a few of the other areas. One of them is around the state's health care and health insurance situation. I mean, just this week we learned that the Copley Hospital is going to be closing its birthing center. A lot of talk about other hospitals around the state under financial stress. Blue Cross Blue Shield apparently flirting with near bankruptcy or something. What's going on here? Are we going to be seeing a crisis of some sort evolving? What do you think, Rob?
I think frankly we're seeing the crisis,
Yeah.
and we heard a lot about that, especially when it comes to Blue Cross Blue Shield. And that was a aspect that was a surprise to me, not coming from a healthcare background, where I'm seeing the main insurer, frankly my insurer, saying we might go under. And when I hear about insurers, I'm skeptical of hearing about that, but it was pretty clear that this is something that needed to be addressed right away. And it was outside of the legislature, with the UVM hospital and Blue Cross Blue Shield having a different negotiation, and towards the end of it, we saw a couple of different things that went into or were attempted to address that. One of those was it's a fairly complicated pricing scheme, but that would fundamentally impact certain hospitals. I think it was 6 hospitals in the state, to essentially limit how much they can charge for particular drugs. And the push was to have that to be done right away, and it would save some millions of dollars and reduce premiums for Blue Cross Blue Shield. We saw pretty quickly that was going to be a significant impact on a number of hospitals, and Brattleboro, the Bennington Hospital, Rutland in particular, where if they happen right away, their budgets are already in place. So we really put an effort into delaying that, but not to stop it entirely, because it is something that's going to reduce our premiums. And I read in an article not too long ago that the projected premium increase for next year is lower because of this bill that we passed, reducing the amount that certain drugs can be charged by hospitals. So that was one of the efforts that was taken. And there's another more deeply complicated that I don't know all of the details on, that's leading towards a reference-based pricing, which is something that's very complicated, but essentially will over time take the cost of healthcare, align it essentially with Medicare to a certain percentage above, which then also will reduce our healthcare costs. This is going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of sort of like details on that working out. But there were steps that were taken, but it was one of the questions that was often talked about. Neither one of us were sitting on the healthcare committees, so we didn't get in deeply into the weeds. But I know there was another bill that's escaping me right now, but there were three that I know we had passed that addressed this directly.
The other one gets to global budgeting.
Yeah.
A big number for all hospitals, and then so we can control that. It's the hospitals are struggling. Blue Cross is on the edge of bankruptcy, and people can't pay the premiums. So it's a truly hot mess, and we absolutely have to do something.
And is this sort of an outgrowth simply of the fact that the state has an aging population and more people need healthcare services and hospital services, or what's different from 20 years ago?
Well, one thing about it is that insurance rates are really just a pass-through. Insurance companies are just a pass-through of the cost. So when their rates go up from your insurance company, it's not because of the insurance company, it's because it's costing more. And they're not making, people always think, they're making a lot of money. They're not making a lot of money. Blue Cross has a very low administrative ratio. It's really just a pass-through of the costs. So, but yeah, our hospital, we have to control hospital costs, and we have to, focus more on primary care. And yet, the whole time, we're both fully aware of the fact that hospitals are struggling.
I know Vermont's not the only state where this is going on, but...
The committee did really good work, by the way. They did really good, careful work this year, the healthcare committee in the Senate. The global budgeting, the reference-based pricing, which is coming, and then what they did for the drug prices. So hospitals are, I think when it comes down to it, hospitals are going to have to make some hard choices.
So some services that people were used to getting at their local hospital, now they'll have to go someplace else.
I don't know.
Well, that's what I saw with the closing.
Yeah.
Copley.
Well, let's move on. And another big bill that you folks worked on was one around attempting to incentivize more housing construction, and it has an interesting provision in there about I guess it was the CHIP, and I apologize for not being exactly sure what that acronym stands for, but it sounds like tax increment financing, or like what was employed at the Putnam Block to help get that going, is now going to be something that smaller communities may be able to take advantage of. Is that kind of the basic story there?
Yeah, it's not smaller. Well, I guess it is smaller communities, but it's project based, as opposed to what you referenced the tax increment financing districts, which was a district based, and you mentioned the Putnam Block. They ultimately didn't use it, but Bennington did apply for and had a TIF district that was an expanded downtown essentially, and the CHIP program, which I think is Community Housing Increment Program. I could be completely wrong on that, but it's basically a smaller TIF where, and what that means is a project essentially can borrow against what their property tax increase would be once the project is done. So they have this. They use the CHIP program. They use it for infrastructure for the project. Yeah, sewer and water line. This is not the building itself, but something that's going to remain in the community for use, and might be used for other development in the area as well. And essentially, once that project is done, the the property value is higher, so the property tax is higher. And what this program allows is that that property tax is going to be less for a number of years afterwards to reduce essentially the cost of the development. And this is specifically for housing, so that we can have the housing projects go into place and it could be done faster. The financing won't necessarily be less complicated, but won't be as high at the time. And we're hoping that it's a tool that can really get the projects going more quickly than they otherwise would have. And there are guardrails for it. There are some things where I think that you have to prove that it wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I forget what the others are, but it's something that I'll say the housing advocates in general were really strongly in favor of, and we're pretty proud of having gotten that through.
I mean, a lot of times with housing projects are hard to make them pencil, and part of it is the infrastructure to get the sewer and water there. It's really expensive, and being able to effectively, put the money up front, but then gain it back on the back end by not having to pay the high taxes for, I think it's for 10 years.
Yeah.
And in the end, the community A has that infrastructure that it can tap into, and 10 years later, it starts getting tax revenue it wouldn't have gotten because of the because then the program goes away and people start paying. So it's been used really successfully in St. Albans. Not this program per se, the TIF program, which is the cousin, if you will, the relative to this. And they've really been able to revitalize their downtown by using this tax increment financing. And so you kind of forgo some tax revenue for a while, but then all of a sudden you have it, and you've got also vibrant downtowns and buildings restored, and that's how it's happened in St. Albans. Here, it's the same concept, just applied to individual housing projects. And because housing it's really hard to make it pencil.
So housing is obviously another one of those issues that's received a lot of attention in recent years. It's been a problem here in the state for decades, probably, I suppose. But was this CHIP Act or S 127, that was the primary piece of legislation that happened this year to help encourage more housing development, I take it?
Yep.
Somewhat. I mean, that was the main sort of overall. The governor did present with his budget 3 particular projects that he saw as being, sort of the examples of what he wanted, and there were larger housing projects. One of them in Bennington being the Ben High project, another in Brattleboro. I think that was called Winston Prouty. Another in Barry, and he had put that into the capital bill, $3.1 million, specifically $1 million essentially for each project. And that caused some controversy, where the governor had vetted these projects and understood what they were. They were all almost ready to put the shovels into the ground. They just needed that little extra to get past the finish line. And that was in the capital bill, so that was in my committee, and we received the capital bill back from the House, where the House had taken it out and put it into the big bill, regular appropriations, and it was a lesser amount than the governor had wanted. So essentially my committee took it back, and the Senate was saying, this is something that we put here, it belongs in the capital bill, and we got more money to it. So we're seeing Ben High project go forward. And I don't know as detail how close Winston Prouty is to putting the shovels in the ground. I know Barry was a little further back, but these projects are going to be getting that money. So it was the overall S 127 of this is everything that's going to do. But the governor was actually focused on particular projects, and we spoke with Commissioner Farrell about that at length, about how they can identify these things, and they're really encouraging them in different ways. There are other grants that they have as well. But housing was a lot of the focus of the session. A new topic for me, which I learned more about than I wanted to, even though especially like the Ben High project, the thing is complicated.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not something that really, I'm a lawyer, and I know I'm not going to be able to understand all of the details of it, but it's these are complicated, difficult projects, and we have a lot of support in Montpelier, both in the executive branch and the legislature.
All right. Well, just moving on then, I guess I just wondered, before we have to run, were there any other bills that your respective committees worked on, agriculture and natural resources as well as education, that you think viewers ought to be aware of and know about, that were kind of really important, might not have gotten the same amount of attention that some of the other bills we've just discussed did, but worth knowing about?
No, you can go
Because I
first. Go
certainly
ahead.
do.
Go ahead and do
Yeah,
that.
so
The
my committee, institutions, was information technology was added to it. So we had the data privacy bill, which ultimately didn't cross the finish line. But the other bill, which is called Age Appropriate Design Code, more commonly known as Kids Code, this is something that I really championed in the committee, and I learned a lot about the dangers, essentially, of social media, but it's other online services for kids. That these things are turned into games where they keep them online, they keep them there overnight. They're sending notifications to kids at midnight. They are having recommendations for friends, and I don't use these, so I don't have the experience of saying exactly how it works, but they'll connect kids to other people. And what has been turning out is that these other people are predators, and they're literally connecting with these children, pretending to be younger, and then coaxing them out of their bedrooms at night. And the way I put it is what we did in Vermont, and I think we're going to be part of the leader on this. We're going to make these, it's essentially big tech, but it's really any company that has these online services. When they design them, they have to do it in a way that's going to take care of children. So the ways that they design it, of just having an algorithm that sends different recommendations, they're going to have to know that they're not recommending adults. They're going to have to prevent children from being seen by adults when they're online. No more notifications at midnight waking up our kids on a school night. And I can't be more proud of Vermont for this, because we're also going to be protecting our children's data. And a lot of it is what I saw as this is Vermont putting in place something that prevents the predator from entering into the bedroom of our kids at night. And a lot of the controversy was this: well, this is what parents should be doing themselves. They should be monitoring. But and I don't talk about my kids with this, because they're not part of this. But as a parent, I know how difficult that is. I know that these are the ways the kids are connecting, and different families have different situations, and it's something where if a company is really profiting off of our children's mental health and also physical health, because when I say they're coaxing the kids out of their bedrooms at night, I'm serious. This has happened in Vermont, and there's presently a lawsuit about some awful things happening to kids. So this is going to put in place stopgaps for that you can't have the algorithms that addict our children. You can't have the algorithms that are connecting our children to predators. And I think that this is something that Vermonters as a whole should really be proud of, and this is something I'm very, very proud of.
I think it passed unanimously, did it?
I don't recall. I think
Almost.
no. There were a couple that voted against it, but
Okay.
it was overwhelmingly supported.
Okay.
In both
related
houses.
to that,
in both
perhaps,
chambers.
the smartphone legislation to
Yeah.
ban
Yep.
smartphones in school from bell to bell.
Yep.
Did that get passed?
Yeah, it passed.
It got passed, and it goes hand in hand with what I was just talking about,
Yeah.
where the kids are going to be free from the distractions at school, then after school. There's going to be a little bit more protection for them in their online presence. And I think, Seth, you mentioned that it was signed by the governor. The phone-free school bill
Yeah.
was signed by the governor
Yeah.
today. Age-appropriate design code was signed by
So
the
that
governor.
goes into effect this coming fall, is it?
Might even be July 1.
I think it's July 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no, actually, I think the phone free school is a
They get
year's
another year.
delay, a year
Yeah,
delay,
okay.
for schools to get the policies in place.
Yeah.
A lot of them already have the policies in place, by the way.
Yeah.
So part of the idea with the phone free schools, it's not that, kids could have their phones before school, they'll have them after school, and, you know, you can't do everything kids still do some of the things that we wish they weren't doing on. But there's at least a period of time in the middle of the day where, rather than at lunchtime, you know, doing this and looking down, they're talking to their friends. You know, they're actually having to interact, and, you know, I'm always a little skeptical of one-size-fits-all, top-down mandates, but I guess I came around to thinking this is there's probably not a downside to this. There's complications for schools when they want to use technology, but there's ways around it.
Yeah,
Ways they can still do that.
there's some not carve-outs, but uses for the school on that.
What fascinated me about that, or one of the things, was that I guess some schools actually directed kids to social media platforms to get information about, you know,
Sports
things that are
events
going
or
on at
teams
school,
that are- yeah.
events happening.
Yeah.
I guess they'll have to kind of stop doing that. if they-
Well, they'll use different products, because there are school programs are still allowed. It just wouldn't be Facebook. It wouldn't be,
Might be email.
yeah, it might
Yeah.
just be plain email.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it would be something that's more education oriented versus just everybody.
Yeah.
Um,
And not using social media, which then,
Yeah.
you know, takes them right into where you don't want.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, just before we go, I just wondered, you know, there's been a lot of, I guess one of the buzzwords of this year so far has been uncertainty. The federal government has been, you know, sort of rescissioning, if that's the right term, some monies that have traditionally been appropriated to states. And I imagine when you voted on the so-called big bill, the appropriation bill, you had to, you know, be concerned that perhaps some of the money that you, in the past, would have come to the state without any question, might not happen this year. And roughly, what, somewhere between 30 and 40% of the state budget comes from federal sources eventually. Any do we have anything to worry about in that area?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a short answer.
Yeah.
I mean, what would
Yeah.
the state be able to pull from reserves to kind of tide things over for 1 year until we get to next year? And
I do know the appropriations bill had a certain amount that was set aside for that. I don't recall what the amount was.
Not enough, but
Obviously not enough. And what we did here, in a lot of ways, with education, with transportation, that this coming year, there was less of a concern. It's what's gonna happen afterwards, and that next year, when we're looking at the budget adjustment, when we're looking at the big bill, that's really when the belt tightening is gonna happen. I know that, our money committees were looking at this in detail. My committees, we did not specifically look at them, other than, you know, hearing about, you know, there was this rescission, this cut to some grant. And I know that the administration has their eye on this. So we're hoping that, there's not much hope there, frankly. But as best as we can, we're going to be addressing it. And it might really mean there are cuts, and it's going to be tough to find those places.
It's not outside the realm of possibility we go back this fall. If the, you know, this bill that's being looked at now, if it makes the cuts to Medicaid that are being talked about, and depending on how quickly they're made and when they roll in, I mean, we could be in, we could have immediate, we could have even more immediate. I think hopefully what Rob just said is going to be the case. We have a little time to deal with it, but it's also not outside. I am keeping in the back of my mind the possibility that we're back in the legislature in September or October.
to make
Because that's
adjustments
been-
to the
Yeah.
state budget.
Yeah, one thing
If
we
what
did-
happens is really draconian.
Yeah, one thing we did do, there's a committee called the E-Board that essentially can make some sort of budget adjustments when we're during the off session. We did give them a little more leeway on doing that just because of this. But it is still where, if it's a very, very significant thing, the legislature's gonna have to come back and discuss it.
Well, let's hope not.
Yeah.
You probably spent enough time up there in the first half of this year, right?
It was a long session.
Yeah, right. Well, and an interesting one, I guess, for whatever that may be worth.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we'll leave it there for today. Much more we probably could talk about, but
Yep.
Anyway, thank you both for making the time for this conversation and informing our viewers on what's been going on in Montpelier. And we'll have you back in a little bit at some point. Give us the update whenever that may be necessary.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Anyway, Rob
Yeah.
Plunkett and Seth Bongartz are state senators from Bennington County here with us today. And thanks to all of you who have been with us today. Hope you found our program interesting and informative. We'll see you again the next time. Take care.